Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another no-nonsense exploration of our current global economic disaster, situation. I'm your host, Boss, here to dissect the latest developments in the land of the free, home of the brave, where they're cooking up innovative ways to, make everything more expensive for you and me. Today, we're going to focus on a story that recently hit headlines, one that merges political spectacle and economic disarray. What happens when a certain President-elect Donald Trump, darling of tariffs, gets ready to return to the White House? What are the ramifications when policies designed in the name of America First lead to inflation before everything else? Buckle up, because while his team tinkers with monthly tariff hikes, the Federal Reserve might just be grabbing its calculator, trying to decide whether to call this inflation transitory or to redefine the word entirely. And doesn't it feel eerily similar, like déjà vu from the pandemic, the Ukraine crisis, or dare I say, the last Trump trade wars? It's a game where everyone loses, but some are more in denial about it. So, let's dive into the economic peril and relentless absurdity hiding behind what's happening under the shiny veneer of tariff-based diplomacy. And more importantly, as I always say, let's laugh at the madness while we still can. Let's get rolling. As Arun Kaptian, Global Head of Economics and Strategy Research at UBS AG, stated in a recent interview, tariffs, particularly the way Trump's team is implementing them, are more than just a blip on the price radar. To put it simply, tariffs raise prices. Imagine you're already riding high levels of inflation, where the population is squeezing pennies, now add a month-by-month inflation shot to specific goods as tariffs gradually rise. It's like adding more logs to a fire that's already out of control. Kaptian mentions that we traditionally conceptualize tariffs as a one-off price increase. Sure, prices spike, but there's an assumption that it cools down after a year because businesses and consumers adjust. But Trump's plan, rolling out incremental tariffs monthly, is like presiding over a slow dance with economic disaster. Each time tariffs notch up, you get hit by fresh price increases. It's as if the powers that be are playing a twisted game of economic roulette, and every time, consumers pay the bill. Does this start to feel familiar? Yes, because it's a slow-motion encore of what economists like to call a rolling supply shock crisis. First, we had COVID-19 rolling supply shocks. Then came Russia's invasion of Ukraine, leading to a cascading series of surprises in oil and gas markets. And now, no chapter of the economic dystopia seems complete without introducing rolling tariffs. It's shocking in its resemblance to the post-pandemic world, except this time, the chaos is self-inflicted. Think about it. Trillions are already being spent trying to temper inflation, and now Washington's policy aims to engineer new supply constraints. What does the day-to-day impact look like? Well, that refrigerator you wanted to buy next month is about to shoot up in price. The imported electronics you rely on for work. Get ready for double-digit hikes week after week. If you're thinking about replacing that car anytime soon, think again. And don't even get me started on food prices, not exempt from the impact of economic tensions. Kaptian's analysis aligns with the broader market sentiment that inflation might again creep up to unmanageable levels. With inflation inching its way to new peaks each time tariffs get ramped up, household wallets will continue to feel the heat. And let's not forget how previous shocks from the pandemic and Ukraine invasion derailed progress already made on inflation objectives. Oh, but it's not just Kaptian. Everyone's thinking the same thing. Jan Hatzius, a glittering intellectual from Goldman Sachs, predicts that inflation won't stay exactly at the Fed's magical 2% target either. Despite growth forecasts telling us otherwise, inflation has its way of lingering. America's monetary authorities, the Federal Reserve, seem caught in a dilemma. June 2025's interest rate cuts are discussed with caution, but are we even sure that'll happen? Like Hatzius said, if inflation floats around sticky 3% instead of a pristine 2%, the Fed might keep its itchy trigger finger off the rate cut button altogether. If that happens, the much-needed respite for debt-laden households may linger well beyond what the markets had hoped. You win this round, inflation. The bigger question is, who's paying for all this? Oh, come on, don't pretend you don't know. It's you, yes, you, ordinary consumers and small businesses, not the megacorporations or power brokers in Washington. Whether these tariffs are targeted at China, the EU, or whoever figures into the next geopolitical spat, the reality is tariffs make everyday products more expensive for you to buy. Let's get one thing straight, a tariff is not just a tax on the foreign exporter who made your laptop. No, it's passed down the chain until it lands in your shopping cart. It's a tax on the importers, distributors, retailers, and ultimately, you, the end consumer. So, when Trump flashes the term negotiation leverage through these tariffs, think of it as pushing higher costs and inflation onto your plate, again. Remember the first trade war Trump unleashed during his presidency? Everything from refrigerators to washing machines saw price spikes, hitting American manufacturers and households alike. According to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, the 2018 to 2019 tariffs cost the average American household $1,300 per year. And now, you better brace yourself for more. Don't believe me? Between 2018 and 2019, the Wall Street Journal reported that tariffs on industrial supplies, including construction materials, led to businesses passing costs onto consumers. These costs made their way through supply chains, inflating prices applied to everyday items. Economic research shows that roughly 66% to 100% of tariff costs are passed on to U.S. consumers. Fast forward to 2025, how much more expensive will things get this time? It doesn't take a master economist to see that this isn't just a wallet-straining issue, it could seriously stall America's economic growth. Goldman Sachs' Jan Hatzius was careful to downplay the far-reaching impact of these tariffs on inflation and GDP, but should we really be this sanguine? Goldman Sachs says that tariffs may not have a huge impact on inflation and growth in a vacuum. But are these increases happening in a vacuum? Of course not. This is happening in a volatile global economic environment already wrestling with demographic shifts, labor shortages, and post-COVID structural shifts. There's no assurance that the added burden of tariffs won't snowball into an even greater decline in long-term U.S. economic growth. Adding fuel to this fire is how global supply chains will react. As tariffs artificially inflate costs for American businesses importing from abroad, the attraction for European, Chinese, or Southeast Asian enterprises to deal with the fickle U.S. market will diminish. This inevitably drives up longer-term supply chain complexity, making U.S. businesses dependent on pricier domestic options or even less favorable import sources. Guess who loses again? Local companies operating on thin margins and consumers trying to afford basic goods. Finally, let's address the elephant in the bigger geopolitical room. With tariffs becoming a bargaining chip, how long can the U.S. continue pressing these policies without serious trade repercussions? By adopting a protectionist stance, the Trump administration is essentially giving rivals like China, the European Union, and even Middle Eastern economies a perverse incentive to take their business elsewhere. Even U.S. allies may tire of Washington's tariff-themed antics. Recall the 2019 irony when America slapped tariffs against imports from Europe in the Boeing-Airbus dispute, targeting everything from Italian wine to Scottish whiskey. European leaders simply found alternative purchasers who were not playing politics with their supply chains. Let's consider a 2024 survey by the World Trade Organization, WTO, which found that retaliatory tariffs in response increased trade costs between affected countries by an average of 9%, overstretching businesses and costing growth. What happens when U.S. allies and rivals alike shift more of their trade volume away from America altogether? The reality is, Trump's strategy of turning tariffs into a rolling monthly event, aimed at gaining negotiating leverage, risks deeply inflating costs across the board. While politicians may boast about short-term wins on international platforms, it's ordinary Americans and businesses will be slammed by surging goods prices, shrinking margins, and global economic uncertainty. Make no mistake, every tariff imposed is a hidden tax levied on the common consumer, an insane spiral of policy mismanagement designed to inflate pride at the White House podiums while deflating consumer purchasing power and economic growth at home. The Fed, already battling inflation fatigue, may find itself trapped between potentially rate cuts and looming price shocks. Investors, businesses, and hardworking American citizens find themselves once again at the mercy of this tariff-driven roller coaster, where the price, higher inflation, squeezed incomes, and stifled growth, falls squarely on everyone but the decision-makers themselves. If Donald Trump facilitates such tariff policies to play politics in 2025, be ready to do one thing: prepare for your wage to stay flat while everything else goes up. Economic growth and public patience, on the other hand, well, they might just plummet. Ladies and gentlemen, stay strong and as always, get ready for more unreasonable, common-sense economic policies that put your money on the line while we all try to survive the long, strange trip ahead.